Hey, thanks for rejoining us. So, first, I'm going to do a quick recap of what was covered in the previous week. Then, after I do that, I want to go ahead and dive into our second subject, which for today is authentication. So, again, we're talking about Alpha Anywhere's built in API generation capability. Very powerful stuff. It allows you to easily and quickly create APIs for your solutions, which unlocks an enormous amount of potential opportunities for you in your application development. So as we mentioned before, the heart of an API is the XBasic class. We take that XBasic class and we run that through a web service class generator. And basically it looks at the class and then allows you to create a web service, which is kind of a special type of web page that will then respond to people who are calling it. That in turn is your web service, and that when published to your server is exposed and then people can call in. And what happens is it's sort of like a traffic cop. The person calls that web service, it goes through that web service class that's been created, and then it goes right to your XBasic class to run the code. The information is then passed back through that. And you can see that on the right side. You have an XBasic class that's the heart of it. On top of it is a web service, and then the application server. So as requests come in through the application server, they're passed to the service, then past the class, and then back through the process there. In our previous demonstration, which you can pull up and watch from last week, we showed how the development environment has these built-in tools that allow you to create web services. In fact, to create test pages and other things like that to test them out, even before you publish them. But along with that, we demonstrated the Postman tool, which is a very powerful free tool that's available for you to exercise your web APIs. Highly recommend you spend time with that. It has a huge amount of facilities and capabilities that make your life easier. Now that we've done a quick recap of our previous demonstration, let's dive into our topic for today. That topic is authentication. When you put your API out in the outside world, you may want to have it publicly available, meaning anybody can call that web service. Think of it as just an open web page to collect data or submit things into your system. But you may not want to use an open web page. You may have security concerns or issues that you need to address. Well, built into the Alpha environment is the ability for you to lock down your APIs with a authentication mechanism. And there's actually a number of different ways you can do that, and we'll talk about those in our demonstration today. So I'm going to go back to our diagram. And as you know, the XBasic class is the heart of your system. And you actually end up building a class or just a function within a class to handle your authentication. So you're using the same methodology you are of generating the data and the processes to support your web service. But in this case, you have a dedicated function that is going to allow you to do authentication. Now, when the application server passes the information to the web service is going to look and say, oh, this API has to be authenticated. I'm just not going to pass it along into the XBasic class that then services it. So then it runs that XBasic class for authentication. Based on what happens there, the web service goes ahead and continues to provide the information to the core XBasic class. If the security requirements are not met, then they send a message back through the application server to the calling entity and let it know that it was not authenticated. And there's a very strict kind of way that handles. Everybody's aware of certain methodologies, so we use a consistent industry standard methodology for this. So let's go ahead and dive in and build some authentication into the classes we demonstrated in our previous episode. We're now in our Alpha development environment, and we're at the web services area. And remember, this is the web service we built last week, alpha_webinar. Now you'll notice something very important. First, the service is unsecured. You can see that by it has a little lock that's unlocked. And you'll also notice up here under the global service properties, we have require authentication for selected methods is not checked. So at this time, this is an open API. You publish it. If people know the endpoint, they call it, they're going to get the data. And what we need to do is lock that down because it's customer data. It may be very important and valuable, and we only want people who have a secret key to be able to do this. So with that, remember, the underlying structure is this basically wrapped a XBasic class. So let's go ahead and save that. Go over to XBasic, and here is the class we generated in our previous demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and open that up now by double-clicking on it, and here's our class. Now nice, some things were defined automatically using our insert. We just had to take that and modify that. And as we mentioned, there's only a single function in here called customers. So what we want to do is we need to provide, as I mentioned before, a function that will allow the system to call and authenticate. And this is where it's very flexible. I'm going to show you a very simple demonstration, but that function can be as complicated and as convoluted as you want. You can put very sophisticated capabilities into your authentication methodologies, but I'm going to show you something simple today just to get the basic concept across. So the first thing we want to do is go here. I'm going to go to line 18, and I need another function. This function, by the way, I'm going to put it inside this class, but it's not necessary it has to be in this class. It could be a completely separate XBasic class. In fact, you may want to do that because you may want to centralize all your authentication in a single class and then build the other classes to do other things for your system, but be able to refer back to that central class. Plus, remember, classes can be moved from project to project, so you could reuse it on a new project without having to kind of extract it out of a whole bunch of other code. So let's go ahead and go up here to the Insert button, and let's put in a function definition. And all that does is it writes a little piece of code for me here, just giving me the basic structure of it. So I'm going to actually call this authentication. Not very original, but it'll work. I'm going to return an in because I'm going to need to return a numeric value. That's what's expected by the system. Now in here I have arguments for my function, and I'm going to pass in an API key that's going to be used to do my validation. So I'm just going to go here, and I'm going to go API underscore key is C. Now the idea, and you'll see in a little bit, is that when the person calls my web service, they'll pass along with it this information, which will kind of come in here, and then we can use that. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to create a very simple kind of function here. So I'm going to go if API key is equal to super secret, then, now this is the key. I'm basically just checking the value of that incoming character string and seeing if it matches. Now, obviously, this is hard-coded. You may want to look up in a database or do some other algorithms. It's really up to you. But as you can see, it's really flexible in terms of once you've set this up, you can set up as complicated as you want to go. So the trick here is that the system is expecting one of two things to come out of your function. So if API key is super secret, it passes, then we want to go authentication is equal to 200. And 200 is an industry standard number that says everything is okay. So you have to put in 200 if it's working. Now, let's say it didn't match. We need to pass back the other situation, which is a failure. So we're going to go here, and I'm going to go else, and I'll go authentication is equal to 401. And again, 401 is industry standard for authentication or authorization failure. So that's it. I've created my basic XBasic function, put it in my same class, again, can be in a different class, that then takes this incoming value, checks it, and either provides back a 200 if it's okay, or 401 if it's not okay. And very important, you can change this. Whatever you want to do, look up in a database, you can do it. I want to be very clear about that obviously this is kind of a very simple, and you probably don't want to go down the road of using my exact code here, but it keeps things simple. So I'm going to go ahead and save this class now. So I've saved that, and it's now available in there. So that's what I need to do as far as a coding standpoint. Now we need to go back into our web service editor and tell the web service how and where to find the authentication information. So let's go ahead and dive into that. I'm going to go back here to my web projects control panel. I'm going to go to web services, and I'm going to go to Alpha Webinar. I'm going to double click on that and take me back into my situation. Now you'll notice immediately there's something new. Since we added authentication into our class, it's now showing up here in available methods. Now, very important, these are available methods you want to expose to the world. We don't want the authentication to be directly exposed to the world. It's actually used kind of under the covers. So you don't want to sit here and basically let that be available. So you don't want to go edit and then turn it on. Just keep it there. And that may be another reason you want to put it into a different class. Now, we want to actually authorize or lock down this customers here. So the first step is we kind of have to tell the class generator, well, where are these authentication methods? So first we need to go up here to require authentication for selected methods. And then we need to click this button here to actually tell the web service where to find the information. So I click there. And it brings up my authentication methods. Now, one thing you'll notice right away, you could actually have multiple authentication methods. You could have a very simplistic one for your internal testing, etc., or you could have a more sophisticated one for different scenarios. And you actually have multiple of them working at the same time. But we only really need one. So I'm going to click here and say Add Method. I'm going to call that Authentication. Call it anything you want. Now, this is asking you, how are we going to use this? In our case, we're going to use XBasics. Notice that you can also use Node if you want to use Node.js underneath the covers. A little bit more of an advanced topic, so I'm going to keep it XBasic. The next thing it's asking me, well, where do I find this XBasic to do this? So we go Class, click there. We pick our class. Remember, we put it in the same class as our web service. Don't have to, but I did. Click OK. Now it's saying, well, okay, I know what class, but what actual function within that service should I go look for? So I click here. You'll notice that it's showing me all of the functions that are available in my class, and I want to click Authentication and click OK. Now, this is very important. There's two ways to kind of pass information into the authentication. This comes in, I'll demonstrate both of them so you kind of get a feel for both. But one's called query string, so it's actually going to be in the URL. The other is called header. Now you're going to want to lean towards header, but I'm going to start with query string to make it very, very easy. So I'm going to click there. So I've defined my method. I've basically told the web service, here's where you go when someone needs to authenticate. This is how you go find the XBasic code to do that. Click OK. And now we've defined our authentication method. So that's kind of a global aspect. Now we need to actually go into the web service function or endpoint and then tell it a little more information to lock it down, because you'll notice it's still a open lock. So if I publish this, it would still be widely available. So I'm going to click here for Edit Method Properties. And you'll notice down below we have a Authenticated button right here. So I'm going to click that. And it's asking me, well, which authentication method do you want to use? We only have one, so we'll click Select and click Authentication, click OK. So now I'm going to click OK. And now you'll notice that we have a little lock there. And that lock tells me now my service is now locked down and will run that XBasic code to do authentication whenever someone exercises this endpoint. Good to go. I'm going to go ahead and click Save just to save it. Now to test this out, we're going to reuse the concept we did last week and do a live test of the API. So I'm going to click here. That's going to open up our live test page. You're going to notice something new here. We still have our same structure, but you see up here, we have a new button here called Authorize, because we've locked this down so it kind of knows that it needs some kind of level of authorization. So let's test it out. I'm going to click Get here. Going to scroll down, try it out, and watch what happens when I click Execute. It's going to execute the call, and you're going to see, in this case, you don't get the data back. Because we didn't put in the proper authentication information, it is now saying, you got a 401, that's unauthorized. So notice this key code here, 401. That's the number that was passed back out of the XBasic function. And that is industry standard. So everything knows, 401, I'm unauthorized. I need to do something differently from that standpoint there. Now, if I want to go up here, I can click here to authorize it so I can test it with my authorization. You'll notice that it's telling me it's in the query. So we're going to go super secret. That was my super secret code. And I'm going to click authorize. And all that does is kind of record my information. So now I'm going to scroll back down here. I'm going to click execute. Now it's going to pass that code along with my information into the API endpoint and see if it gets authorized. And you'll notice, in this case, it worked. Here's my data. And you'll notice when it called the endpoint, it actually added that API key equals super secret. And then my XBasic function extracted that information, did the comparison, and said, yeah, good to go. I'm going to give you a 200, and you're off to the races. Now, again, query string, perfectly viable, but not as secure as a header thing. And we'll show you that in a few moments. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's go into our Postman solution and run it from there, just to give you a feel for how you would do that within there. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this to my clipboard. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go ahead and just create a brand new one. And once this is up in front of me, I'll put in that query right here, paste it. Now, you'll notice that this is the full URL, including the API key. One thing that's nice about Postman is it actually extracted that query string element, and so I could just edit it right here. I don't have to actually keep editing it right here. So let's make a mistake. Let's go ahead and give it a wrong key. And I'm going to click Send. In a moment, you'll see it sends it to my API endpoint, and it comes back with a unauthorized 401. Now I'm going to go back in here and go ahead and get rid of it so it is the proper code. Hit send, and you'll see what comes back is a 200 here and the data that's successful. So again, we're using query string here. Let's go back into the system and show you how you can use what's called a header, which is more of industry standard and a little more secure. So I'm going to go back into my alpha development environment, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to the define authentication methods. So remember, when we did this, we selected here query string. So I'm going to modify that to header. And then it's asking me, well, okay, it's going to be in the header, but I need to give it a little bit more information, which is which argument in the header am I going to be looking for? And arguments are what is the elements that are in a header that's passed into the function. So I just click here. I click Add Header Variable, and I'm going to call this API key, and I'm going to insert the argument. And this argument is what I put in that function. Remember, in the function, I put in their API key as C, what's going to be passed into it. So now what it's going to do is it's going to say, I need a header variable called API_key, and I'm going to pass that in to this argument here, because you might have more than one argument in your scenario there. And then you can use those multiple arguments to create more sophisticated security schemes. So again, we've created our header, we've matched it to our argument, we've said we're using the header arguments, and click OK. Let's go ahead and save this. And again, most likely, this is the way you want to go. So I'm going to try and live test the API. So you'll see it's very similar. We have our authorize up here. We have our customers. If I click customer and try it out, execute it, you'll see I get a big no. Now I'm going to click here and click authorize, and I'm going to put in super secret, authorize it. Now I'm going to go ahead and execute it, and in this case, it will work the same. So it's kind of the same, but what's going on behind the scenes is you'll notice here's my URL, but the key is not in the URL. It's actually in a header. This is curl for header called API key super secret. So let's go ahead and go back into Postman and show you how you would run this in Postman. So go back into Postman. So I'm same API endpoint. I'm just using kind of a different method. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and send this using the query string and watch what happens. It's going to give me a 401k, or I'm sorry, 401. It's going to give me a 401. And the reason why is it's not looking for this API key. So it's going to give us a 401. And the reason is that now that I'm using a header, it doesn't even look at this information right here. It just ignores it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of the API key by just clicking it. And you'll notice it gets rid of here. And now I'm going to go over to here to my headers. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put that API key and I'm going to call it super secret. And so headers are kind of that special area on the top of a call. It's not in the query string. Now that I click send, you'll see that we have a 200 because when I sent the request to Alpha, it included my body, which is just kind of empty. It included the URL, and then in the header of the request, it included this data. Alpha said, oh, you know what? For this authentication method, I need to go up and look in the header, grab that information, pass it into my authentication. It looked at it, said, yeah, it matched, sent it back, and then approved it there. So again, I would focus heavily on using headers. It's the right way to go, but you can use both. It's really up to you in terms of how you want to do it from that standpoint there. So that's how you do the different pieces here. Now, once I have my solution completed, I can click save. I can create a test page for people to use if I want to, and I can publish this up to my server and it's good to go. And now I have a more secure environment because someone just can't hit that endpoint and get my customer data. They're going to have this super secret API key to allow them to actually have the API respond. Otherwise, it's going to tell it, no, it doesn't happen there. Now, in our next session, we're going to talk a little bit more about security and specifically the built-in ability to audit the API. Because I think there's two levels of security. First, it's like locking the front door. And someone needs a key to get in that front door to your house. And that's basically what the security does. But then the second aspect is, well, if you've given out 10 keys to different people, you kind of want to know who came and went from your house. So as people walk through or unlock the front door and walk in, you want to capture who that is and the date and time and things like that. There are a number of different applications that require it from a legal standpoint that you track that information. It's also really handy for performance and other things like that. Just kind of have a history of what happened with your API. And this is a very flexible methodology, and we'll demonstrate in our next session.